Good evening, everybody. Oh, this is low. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, first of all, for this very warm welcome. An extra special thanks to Lavinia Frey for inviting me to this evening. I'd like to say it's the most important moment of my life, but my children are present, so it's high up there. It's high up there. Thank you also to everyone who's involved in organizing this event. The process has been nothing but easy and pleasurable for me behind the scenes. Thank you. And next, I would like to thank the support team on stage this evening. So the actor and director, Frank Arnold, will be lending his voice. Will be lending his voice to the German translations of Abdul Razak Goner's work. And somewhere nearby, the interpreters Lilian Astrid Geser and Sylvia Schreiber will be making sure that this event is accessible to those among us who are not fluent in English. Thank you very much. And finally, to the wonderful audience, thank you very, very much for your attendance this evening. I'd particularly like to give a shout out to the Zanzibari, Tanzanian and Kenyan representatives in the room. Karibu sana. So, Abdul Razak Goner quite possibly needs no introduction to anybody in this room, but allow me, however, to welcome him to this stage in a manner fitting for someone of his stature. Abdul Razak Goner was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2021 for his uncompromising and compassionate penetration of the effects of colonialism and the fates of the refugee in the gulf between cultures and continents. It was such a surprise to the literary establishment that after the announcement of the prize, printed copies of his books were briefly unavailable. And it was reported on Deutschlandradio that at the time of the award, none of the German publishers held the rights to Abdul Razak's novels. As the British Sudanese novelist Leila Abu Leila said, now our well-kept secret is out in the open. He's the author of 11 novels, including Paradise, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and the Whitbread Award, By the Sea, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize and the shortlisted for the Los Angeles Times Book Award, Desertion, which was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and Afterlives, which was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Fiction in 2021 and longlisted for the Walter Scott Prize. His latest novel, Theft, where is the latest novel? Anyway, you can see it. His latest novel, Theft, was published in English in March 2025 and was just published last week on Wednesday in German as Diebstahl. So congratulations on that. Yes. In November 2023, Abdul Razak Goner held the annual Schiller Lecture in Marbach. He is Emeritus Professor of English and Post-Colonial Literatures at the University of Kent and lives in Canterbury. To quote the mother of the narrator in the novel Gravelheart, nothing stands between us and atrocities but words, so there is no choice but to try and imagine. Professor Goner, it is my great pleasure and privilege to talk with you this evening about the power of words, the power of imagination, and the art of writing. So, dear Professor Goner, I'd like to welcome you back to the ELB because you've been here before. You had the German book launch of Theft in Potsdam on Thursday. Did it go well? Why is that making people laugh?
I don't know, because I suppose if it hadn't gone well, I might have gone home or something like that. Yes, it went very well. It was also my first visit to Potsdam, which everyone says, really? As if why would it be kind of
It's
like
the
a
center
central
of the
destination?
Earth. Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, it was, and it was very interesting, and it was very good to be there with the audience and presented by Dennis Sheck, who's
Yes.
been a supporter and very good.
It's the third time you've spoken with him, I think, on stage.
Yeah, it's the third time,
Yeah. So we're celebrating the 25th edition of the International Literature Festival Berlin, started in 2001 by Ulrich Schreiber. And this talk, as Lavinia Frey said, is one of the anniversary highlights of the festival. And we'll be talking about the art of writing. And within that, I'd like to focus on three main aspects, which is your literary influences, the recurring themes in your literature, for example, exile, migration, and colonial continuities, and writing as political and poetic practice. My first question, right at the beginning of your Nobel Prize lecture, you say writing has always been a pleasure. And honestly, I was surprised because for me, it's sometimes a pleasure, but mostly I suffer. So do you have any tips for me?
Yeah, take it easy.
Okay, I'll try.
What that means, writing has always been a pleasure, doesn't mean that it isn't labor. But that before it was, as I say in that lecture, before it was anything like a profession or even something that was to do with addressing anybody in particular, it was a pleasure to do. The only person I was addressing at the time when I was started to do those things was, of course, the teacher, who would say, write on this and that. But it was a pleasure to do that. It was my favorite class at school, when the teacher would put some banal thing on the board, and then you have to, well, not have to, but then you sit there and you try and make something interesting and intricate out of it. It was good fun to do. But of course, writing is writing of another kind, writing which is not addressed to the teacher or not addressed just to oneself. Then you have to, there are other demands that it makes on you. You have to be clear, you have to make judgments of all kinds about how will this sound in the ears of somebody I don't know, because you don't know who's reading this. And also, how have I got it right? Have I got the balance right? Does it sound beautiful enough, or does it sound, etc.? That's labor, but it's still pleasurable.
Okay, I take your word for it. So yeah, as you've mentioned, you've written since your childhood, and also in your Nobel Prize talk, you read a few lines from a poem by D.H. Lawrence, and you've kindly agreed to read those lines again this evening for us. This is your moment.
This is the,
yeah.
this is the moment that she gave me this paper as I walked in. And said, "You're going to read this, aren't you?" I mentioned this poem as part of the Nobel lecture, because it kind of came back to me as part of that explanation for saying, for me, writing was always a pleasure. D.H. Lawrence, as you may know, or you perhaps don't, was at some point in his career, in his life, a school teacher in Croydon, and he hated it. But he writes a poem called The Best of School about the one thing he did like. As I sit on the shores of the class, alone, watch the boys in their summer blouses as they write, their round heads busily bowed, and one after another rouses his face to look at me, to ponder very quietly, as seeing he does not see. And then he turns again. With a little glad thrill of his work, he turns again from me, having found what he wanted, having got what was to be had. So that reminded me of the pleasure I used to take in that class that I was talking about. So he's sitting there watching these children absorbed in the process of writing.
And my question was, what was it like to be a young writer at that time? So how did you get to see what you did not see and get what was to be had?
You mean when I was a schoolboy?
Yeah. Yes.
No. It was nothing as intense as this is the teacher speaking.
Okay.
So at the point when I was reading this poem, I myself was a teacher, and I appreciated it not because I was the boy, as well, but that I was a teacher looking at them and thinking, I remember feeling like them. What I think he's saying is that they're not actually writing in the same way as he would have been writing, which is to say they're not writing to speak to anybody. The thrill that and then he turns again with the little glad thrill of his work, he turns again from me, turns inwards, turns to where he was with whatever his imagination was doing, and so writes like that. And that was the pleasure of that. It's, the teacher will read it, but it doesn't really matter. The point is the doing of it and the completing this little project or whatever it is.
And you mentioned somewhere that writing wasn't a career option for you, actually, as a young child. Like, you enjoyed writing, but you didn't know anybody in your family or close networks who was a writer, and yet you continued to write. So would you tell us a little bit about your motivation? Why did you continue to write, and how did your writing change as you grew older?
Yeah, it's not that I didn't have a role model in my close, whatever, what was the word you used?
Did I say family?
We said family and something else. Sort of, close.
Networks. Thank you for listening
You're
closely.
Listening.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know anybody who would have been a role model in that sense. So it wasn't just anyone nearby. In other words, I didn't know anybody for whom writing was a career. It never occurred to me that one could make a career out of writing. Nobody else that I knew, even those who were writers, were doing it like that. They had jobs, so teachers or worked in a bank or civil servants, and then they wrote poems or whatever. What writing we did, I wasn't the only one, and like I'm sure a lot of people write in the audience as well. But the difference is when you're writing like that, you are writing possibly for yourself, maybe at certain moments it's necessary or useful or helpful or pleasurable to write things down. At other times it's, for us anyway, for younger people, it would be because there's some kind of end-of-term review or something like that, and you make a little play or something like that. And sometimes maybe it's just for yourself, to kind of record something. I know people who do that. It's not intended for anybody else to see. The difference, I think, when it becomes something that is going to go public, and even that's not a decision that I, anyway, made at once, it was like a little secret that I was engaged in and I was doing, and only gradually, every now and again, what are you doing? I'm writing something, but I'm making light of it as well. So it's really a very big thing to be able to say at some point, I'm a writer.
Yeah. When was that point for you?
After I'd published about 3 books, I think.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's such a big thing to aspire to, that it seems like you're being too kind of self-aggrandizing, as it were, to say this. So I guess what I was waiting for was for somebody else to say, you are a writer.
Yeah.
Rather than for me to say it. So it wasn't like one hears stories of some writers successfully who had made a decision at the age of 10 or something like that they were going to be writers. Maybe it's because Virginia Woolf being one. Maybe because she's growing up in a writerly family and is being encouraged to do so and to think about this possibility, this ambition of becoming a writer. That wasn't the case with me, anyway. For me, it came out of the difficulty of being in England.
Mm-hmm. We will talk a little bit more about your experiences later. I wanted to move on to get into an example of your writing. So your most recent novel, Theft, which is your 11th novel, published this year, examines the lives of 3 Tanzanians, Karim, Fawzia, and Bada, as well as their relationships with each other at the end of the 20th, the beginning of the 21st century. It's full of detailed observations about individual struggles, family life, gender roles, but it also weaves in historical observations about the effects of colonialism and migration on Zanzibar and Tanzania. We're going to hear an extract of the novel which provides an example of this, and the German translation will be read by Frank Arnold. But just before we hear that, I would like to ask you to please read a little bit from the original text.
Better work this out. Read sideways or frontways? Okay, here we go. The Tamarind Hotel was on the narrow street near the old ivory workshop, round the corner from the former residence of the French consul. The consul had lived there a long time ago, in the time when the Omani sultans still dealt independently with foreign governments, among them the British, the French, the Germans, and the United States of America. Later in the century, the British took over the Sultan's affairs in order to advance progress and civilization. The Sultan of the French consul's time was the founding patriarch, sire to many concubines in Syria, purchased from as far away as Albania, Georgia, Cairo, and Abyssinia. The Sultan shopped far and wide to sate his pleasures, and there were always people whose personal tragedies made them vulnerable to such commerce. With these women, the Sultan fathered scores of sons and daughters, all of whom became legitimate princes and princesses. He was husband to only one wife, but that union was childless. Further down the road from the residence of the French consul, next to the palace complex which housed part of the Sultan's enormous family, was the former dwelling of a German merchant. One of the Sultan's daughters, Selma, the one whose mother was a Georgian or Circassian, or possibly an Albanian concubine, initiated a famous scandal by having an affair with a German merchant, whose name was Herr Reuter. Their liaison became impossible to hide after she fell pregnant. And with the help of the British mission, they escaped the feared wrath of her family on board a Royal Navy frigate, which took her and Herr Reuter to Aden. In Aden, she was baptized, married the Herr, and gave birth to a boy, who died a few months later en route to Hamburg. They had 3 other children before Herr Reuter was run over by a tram in Berlin, 3 years after their arrival in Germany. The valiant princess wrote a memoir of their daring love affair, which became popular in Germany and Britain and provided some respite from her straitened circumstances. She made her life in Germany and lived there into her late 70s. Nearby, on the same road as the princess and her merchant, were the houses of other Omani princes and aristocrats, many of them the Sultan's descendants or cousins and related families. Years later, after the overthrow and expulsion of the Sultans, the houses became hotels for tourists, furnished and decorated to evoke that same perished era. Thank you.
Das Tamarind Hotel lag in einer engen Gasse in der Nähe der alten Elfenbeinfabrik. Gleich um die Ecke hatte früher der französische Konsul gewohnt. Der Konsul hatte vor langer Zeit dort gelebt, in einer Ära, als die osmanischen Herrscher noch selbst mit den ausländischen Regierungen verhandelten, darunter Briten, Franzosen, Deutsche und US-Amerikaner. Später in jenem Jahrhundert übernahmen die Briten die Amtsgeschäfte des Sultans, um den Fortschritt und die Zivilisation voranzutreiben. Der Sultan, der zur Zeit des französischen Konsuls herrschte, war ein Gründerpatriarch und Gebieter über viele Konkubinen und gekaufte junge Frauen aus Albanien, Georgien, Kairo und Abessinien. Um seine Gelüste zu befriedigen, kaufte der Sultan in nah und fern ein, und immer gab es Menschen, deren persönliches Unglück sie für derlei Geschäfte anfällig machte. Mit diesen Frauen zeugte der Sultan unzählige Söhne und Töchter, alles legitime Prinzen und Prinzessinnen. Verheiratet war er nur mit einer einzigen Frau, doch diese Ehe blieb kinderlos. Ein Stück straßenabwärts, hinter der Residenz des französischen Konsuls und neben der Palastanlage, in der die große Familie des Sultans residiert hatte, befand sich das ehemalige Haus eines deutschen Kaufmanns. Salme, eine der Töchter des Sultans, deren Mutter eine georgische oder tscherkessische oder möglicherweise albanische Konkubine war, sorgte für einen berühmten Skandal, indem sie eine Affäre mit besagtem Kaufmann einfing, Herrn Rüthe. Als sie schwanger wurde, war die Liebschaft nicht mehr geheim zu halten und mit Hilfe der britischen Missionare entkam sie dem Zorn der Familie auf einer Fregatte der Royal Navy, die sie nach Aden brachte. Dort ließ die Sultanstochter sich taufen, heiratete Herrn Rüthe und gebar einen Jungen, der wenige Monate später auf der Überfahrt nach Hamburg starb. Das Paar bekam 3 weitere Kinder, bevor Herr Rüthe in Berlin von einer Straßenbahn überfahren wurde, 3 Jahre nach seiner Rückkehr nach Deutschland. Die tapfere Prinzessin verfasste ein Memoir über die waghalsige Liebesaffäre, das in Deutschland und Großbritannien sehr populär wurde und sie vorübergehend von ihren finanziellen Sorgen befreite. Sie baute sich in Deutschland ein neues Leben auf und blieb dort, bis sie Ende 70 war. Unweit der Residenzen der Prinzessin und des Kaufmanns befanden sich die Häuser anderer osmanischer Prinzen und Aristokraten, viele davon Abkömmlinge, Cousins oder andere Angehörige des Sultans. Jahre später, nach dem Umsturz und der Vertreibung der alten Herrscher, wurden die Gebäude zu Touristenhotels umgebaut, wobei Mobiliar und Ausstattung an vergangene Epochen erinnern sollten. Die ersten Anzeichen des touristischen Booms machten sich Mitte der 1980er bemerkbar, kurz nach der Lockerung der Devisenbestimmungen. Überall eröffneten Cafés, in denen Burger und Pommes serviert wurden, statt Ziegenfleischeintopf, Mandasi und süßem Tee mit Milch. Andenkenläden verkauften indische Stoffe und chinesische Ledersandalen, die sie als einheimische Produkte ausgaben. Nippes wie Armbänder aus Elefantenhaar, Perlenmatten und geschnitzte Tiere, die auf der Insel unbekannt waren, Buschböcke, Giraffen, Elefanten, Antilopen, wurden in großen Mengen vom Festland importiert. Früher waren in den Hotels vor allem Beamte abgestiegen und Journalisten, die zu einem Kurzbesuch auf die Insel kamen, um über die neuesten Missstände zu berichten. Aber jetzt tummelten sich dort plötzlich die Urlauber. Ausländische Investoren kauften alte Gebäude und bauten sie zu vergoldeten orientalischen Luxusfantasien um. In Erwartung der Massen entstanden neue Hotels in Strandlage. Hauseigentümer mit Unternehmergeist renovierten Zimmer und vermieteten sie günstig, sodass es nun Unterkünfte in allen Preisklassen gab. Die örtlichen Politiker strichen ihren Anteil ein, Gewerke und Baustoffhandel florierten. Geschäfte schossen aus dem Boden, für die es früher keine Nachfrage gab. Reisebüros, Autovermietungen, Bars, Boutiquen, teure Restaurants. Es herrschte ein ständiges Kommen und Gehen. Die Leute reisten aus Dar es Salaam, Mombasa und Nairobi an, später sogar aus den Golfstaaten und von noch weiter. Der Tourismus brachte tausende Ausländer, hauptsächlich Europäer, die kein Swahili sprachen und mit konzentriertem Stirnrunzeln ihren Vergnügungen nachgingen, sich in der glühenden Sonne auf Liegen ahlten, in den Läden um Andenken feilschten und in den Gassen hinter einem fremden Führer herstolperten, der halb erfundene Texte aufsagte. Das Konsol Faransa, wie es auch 100 Jahre nach den Zeiten des Konsuls noch hieß, hatte einen großen, ummauerten Garten, Schauplatz von Partys, Konzerten und sogar Hochzeiten. Gleich um die Ecke befand sich ein hohes, schmales Gebäude, das früher indischen Kaufleuten gehört hatte. Die Familie war längst nach Indien, England oder Kanada ausgewandert, in eines jener Länder, das Indern während der Panik, die nach der Unabhängigkeit in Afrika um sich griff, Zuflucht bot. Heute residierte dort das Tamarind. Die Broschüren beschrieben es als exklusives und höherpreisiges Boutique-Hotel im Herzen der Altstadt. Über der Tür hing ein kleines Holzbrett mit aschgrauem, ehemals schwarzem Grund und weißen, verblichenen Lettern. F. Kassam und Sohn, Groß- und Einzelhandel. Das Schild war alt und wettergegerbt, ein Relikt aus einer anderen Zeit und sollte auf irgendeine Art den Boutique-Charakter des Hotels unterstreichen. Neben dem Eingang befand sich ein neueres Schild mit dem Hotelnamen in altmodischen Lettern. Als Bardar erfuhr, dass er ausgerechnet dort als Aushilfe anfangen sollte, war er zunächst enttäuscht. Das Hotel lag mitten in der Stadt, in einem Wohngebiet. War es das, was die Touristen sich wünschten? Würden sie die räumliche Nähe zu ganz gewöhnlichen Leuten nicht als störend empfinden, als das Gegenteil von Urlaub? Wäre ein Strandhotel nicht viel schöner oder wenigstens eins mit Pool und großer Terrasse, wo man unter einem bunten Schirm sitzen und Cocktails trinken konnte? Er hatte die Fotos in den entsorgten Zeitschriften der Herren gesehen, halb bekleidete Frauen, die sich lachend in die Brandung warfen, Leute, die sich neben riesigen, glitzernden Pools auf Sonnenliegen räkelten. Sollten Ferienhotels nicht eher so aussehen? Doch sobald er das Tamarind einmal betreten hatte, erkannte er, dass es über eigene Reize verfügte. Zwar gab es keinen Pool, doch die Zimmer waren geschmackvoll eingerichtet und die Ausstattung, sagte der stellvertretende Manager, sehr luxuriös.
Danke. Yeah, one of the perks of being a moderator is I get to choose the extract. So I chose this extract because it shows an example of the very subtle, what I would call blink and you could miss it humor that you employ in your writing, like the sentence, later in the century, the British took over the Sultan's affairs in order to advance progress and civilization. I love that very much. But I also chose it because of the depiction of the effects of migration and colonization in Zanzibar. And I often say much of German history didn't actually take place in Germany, and I still think that for some extent that's not widely known. For example, you write about Salma, and I knew about Salma because a close friend of mine, Aisha Ahmed, who's in the audience somewhere, wrote her doctoral thesis. Did you say something, Aisha? Did I hear you? Make yourself known. I can't hear you. There she is, there's Aisha. So Aisha wrote this brilliant book, everybody go out and get it. It's called Arabische Präsenzen in Deutschland um 1900. So it's about the Arab presence in Germany in 1900. So I found out about lots of people who had an effect. Would you like to have a look? Lots of people had an effect in Germany at the time. What I wanted to ask you was, what do you think the role of creative writing has or can have in drawing attention to the histories which are not or not yet included in formal school curricula?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can make that the ambition, really. It sounds a little bit too instrumental for my liking.
Okay.
You know, that you do this because then this will be read by school children or something like that. I think what is interesting for me, about writing about historical moments is two things. First, not to sort of like reveal an unknown history, because in fact it is known. Say the episode of the German presence in our part of the world, or in Africa on the whole, it is known by historians. But it's not known in a general way. It's not part of popular knowledge. And this is true of many historical events, because popular knowledge often tends to be, it tends to be either self-serving to the national narrative, which does not always want to remember things that are shameful or unpleasant, or sometimes it's because the information is actually kept away from them by the state, by those who control information. We have multiple examples of this even in so-called contemporary liberal democracies, where the state simply does not give information, let alone under a period of, let's say, of empire, of colonial possessions. So there's a great deal that is known, but is not popularly known. Now, it seems to me that that's where fiction can, at times, not as a kind of like a requirement, but can at times bridge something there between the historical discourse, as it were, and popular knowledge or popular ignorance, if you like. Not necessarily with the intention of saying to people, you should know about this. Not really, not as directly as that, but think of it more benignly as, I think you should know about this. Something like that. You might find this interesting to know about, because, of course, it's better to know than not to know, and because it concerns you in some way, because it is part of, as it were, our human relations, our human encounters with each other. So I prefer to think like that. And then, of course, an intelligent teacher would say, I think this is a good thing to take to my school children.
Yeah.
Then that's okay to do that. But I think as a kind of like the starting ambition for writing, I think it probably has the possibility of becoming a little too directive.
Okay. I was thinking about it also because in another discussion that I was following about how your work before the Nobel Prize wasn't as well known within Tanzania and Zanzibar, but people had been reading other authors like Chinua Achebe or Ngugi wa Thiong'o, that they were well known because they were on the school curriculum.
Absolutely. What that demonstrates is something very simple, really, that there isn't yet a reading culture. Right. People don't read for pleasure. They read because they're given the book to read at school. Yeah. That's why because those writers, school programs in most places in Africa, at least small places in Africa, certain African states are prosperous enough and diverse enough within them. I'm thinking South Africa, for example, or Nigeria possibly, or maybe other places, and certainly places like Egypt. But in smaller places, who sets the curriculum? The Ministry of Education. And therefore, it has to be something that is already kind of like approved by the syndicate, if you like. It's okay for the kids at school to read this. And in a way, because those children going to school are not going to buy those books, even though they're set for them. They are expecting the school to provide them. Right. So the state, when it makes, or the Ministry of Education, when it makes its decision, it also provides the books. Therefore, it can't provide a great big library of books. It will select, it will have a short list of books. And those will be there for the next 15 years. Right. And that's what people read.
Could you share with us something about your writing process? So what does it look like when Abdul Razak Gurnah decide, like how do you come up with an idea for a novel? When do you know, oh, this is the story I want to write? And then what's your process like?
This is so that you can make it easy.
I'm taking notes.
It's a fairly lengthy process in the sense that the idea sometimes lurks for ages, and I'm not even always sure that it is an idea, but it might be. I'll give you an example of how it sometimes works. I wrote what became the last paragraph of Paradise first. That's the first thing I wrote. Not because I knew it was going to be the last paragraph, but that's simply because I wanted to write about a recruiting moment, a moment when just before the First World War, when the German authorities were trying to recruit soldiers or carriers or whatever for their Schutztruppe. I didn't even know they were called Schutztruppe at the time. So I wrote this page and a half, imagining what a recruiting drive might look like. And then I was doing other things. Soon after that, I went back to Zanzibar for the very first time after 17 years or so. So that was 1984. And I hadn't thought of this before, but as I was watching my father, who was still alive and very elderly, in fact, he died the following year, and he was walking from our house, and across from our house is the mosque in Malindi, where we lived, where my sisters still live, which is our area. And I was in the house, and it just occurred to me, he's old, he's frail, he's struggling across there. And I thought he would have been a child of about 10 or 12 when colonialism took over. And what would he have seen? Now, it really had not occurred to me to think like this about him at all. And I guess that was what was the seed of Paradise. Mm-hmm. That moment and that child, and what does a child understand, and so on. But I repeat, that was 1984. Paradise was published in 1994. So it actually took until around about 1990 before I was able to return to that paragraph that I had written. But by this time, my thinking had gone much, much further than that. And so instead of being the opening, it became the ending.
Right.
Because in the meantime, I myself had returned, after that first visit in 1984, I had returned 3 times to Zanzibar, and the last time that I was there in 1989 was I took a long trip along the coast on my own and visited various places and so on. I think I had an idea that I would write some kind of sort of travel sort of piece, non-fiction piece anyway. And I came back, sat at my desk, and started to write Paradise. That process occurred in a way, both as part of the going and visiting places and hearing stories. As those of you who may have read Paradise, you will know there are a lot of people sitting around telling each other stories, precisely because I too heard those stories as I was kind of going around and hearing them. And some of them were so bizarre that I thought, nah, this is not serious. But I know exactly that kind of storytelling because it's what I grew up with. People telling stories because that was their understanding of the world. The world looks like this. They're not necessarily people who've read this in a book or who have libraries to go and check the facts. They make them up. They hear something on the news, they fill in the gaps. And they make a complete story out of it. And they tell each other, and they argue, and they debate, and so on. So all of that came back to me because of this kind of being able to encounter it. So anyway, that's a long answer to how a book comes into being.
Yes, that is a great answer. Thank you. I'm fascinated also by your work that you weaving different. So you write in English, but you weaving Kiswahili, Arabic, sometimes some German here and there. And
When there are Germans around, I
When
don't,
there are Germans
I don't do
around,
it for.
okay.
I don't do it
there's always
for
Germans
the
around.
fun of it.
Right. But what I wanted to ask you is, you have a story. In my imagination, you have these characters that are living and talking mostly in Swahili, but you're writing in English. Is there some kind of work involved in trying to imagine these lives, these histories, these cultures, these conversations?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
How does that
Sure.
work?
Well, because it goes on in the same brain, as it were, the same mind, it only becomes necessary, I think, it only becomes necessary, or mostly it becomes necessary when it's dialogue, to try and imagine. It's how to put it. It's one of the more dynamic aspects of writing about something like that, because it's not translating, but it's trying to imagine and evoke a sense of what might be emphasized, what might be the thing that would cause offense. Say, how would you say it? How would you say something like when it's intended to be sympathetic? It would be done differently in English from how it would be done, say, in Swahili. So, but the words might be similar, or might be I'm sorry is not enough probably in Swahili, and it might be misunderstood anyway. That it might actually mean something not intended, whereas in English, and in fact, I remember the very first time I went to Nigeria, because I worked in Nigeria for a couple of years, and at the airport, I'm coming out of the airport with my luggage, and somebody got in the way, or I got in the way of somebody else, and he said, "Sorry, please." And I thought, why? Because hardly, it's just sort of stepping aside from each other. But it's a very common thing in Nigeria. People say, "Sorry, please," because they're sympathizing with you.
Yeah.
They're not apologizing. They're saying to you, "Sorry that you're having this problem." And what he meant, I think, is that you are struggling with your luggage. Anyway, so there are ways, and it is really quite enjoyable to do this. It's not difficult, but it is enjoyable to imagine how you might put words that would evoke something that is particular about expression, which is not in English, but and nobody seems to notice. There is another thing, though, when you're using material as research, as it were, and somebody has translated. I found this again in Paradise. In part of the research I was doing, I was reading materials that have been collected by German anthropologists on the people who used to work on the caravans to the interior. And of course, they just spoke, and somebody, presumably another Swahili speaker, but who could understand German, then translated for the anthropologist. And I read these, which were parallel texts, the Swahili and then the translation. And I thought, no, the translation doesn't sound right. So in order to use it for myself, I had to retranslate it from the Swahili,
right.
That kind of thing. So there are moments like that, but most of the time it's really trying to do it from just imagining how people speak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that sounds complex.
Yes, but good to do.
Yeah.
It's good.
For the next reading, I've chosen an extract from Afterlives, which was published in 2020. It's your 10th novel. And Afterlives is translated into German as Nachleben. And before we hear the extract, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Askari and their role in enforcing colonial violence in East Africa and the Schutztruppe. Yeah.
The Schutztruppe in particular, of course, in Paradise, but all the European colonial nations, powers, used mercenaries. The British had their King's African Rifles, The Belgians had the Force Publique, I think it was called, the Portuguese, and of course the French had large numbers of African mercenaries whom they used all over the world, in Indochina, indeed in the First World War and in the Second World War, and of course Moroccan mercenaries as well. The British did not use the African mercenaries in particular until when they were in really dire straits in Burma. And the reason they didn't do that was because, and this is not speculation, this is there, written, general this to general that. The reason they didn't use the African mercenaries anywhere but in Africa until very late in the 1940s is because they didn't want those African soldiers to see white people being killed. It's true. I mean, it's not an exaggeration or a speculation. It really is. This is the reason why we must not allow these soldiers to go into combat where they might witness the deaths of white soldiers. In the end, they had no choice but to do so because they were running out of bodies to throw into the fray, as it were. So there's a long history, in other words, to using mercenaries. In fact, the British have the longest because of the use of Indian soldiers in the conquest of India. That war in Africa in 1914, 1918 was, in a sense, you might think of it as the final stage of that process that is called the scramble for Africa. So it's really, in a way, getting rid of the Germans from the continent. Of course, the big war was also happening in Europe. It was also happening in the Middle East. It was just, I guess, why it's called a world war. But in the case of Africa, it was really a small war between these nations. But the casualties were hundreds of thousands, and they were all Africans. The Askaris played their part. They were absolutely brutal. That's how they were trained to be. But the deaths, the hundreds of thousands, were primarily from hunger, from disease, from the kind of the German Schutztruppe were famous for the commander, Zittau Vorbeck, was famous for having kept this war going, or this conflict, should we say, going for 4 years with a small force. But one of the tactics that he used was to destroy fields, to destroy, so that as these allies were advancing, there was no food for them. But also there was no food for the people whose land they were tearing apart in this way. And indeed, the punishments that were meted out for any slight infringement were for both sides, but particularly for the Germans, because this is how they started doing their colonialism, and this is how they're going to continue until the end. So the history of the Schutztruppe, in particular, is one almost manic. There is, in fact, a very good book by a man called Fabian, which is called something We're Out of Our Minds, which is a history of German colonialism in Deutsch-West Africa, but also in Namibia, where, as you probably know, there was this almost incomprehensible genocide. So there's something that happened in the process, and I don't know why exactly. I have one or two theories, as it were, but I don't know why. All colonialism was brutal and coercive and violent, but this late stage in the 19th century, when Germany becomes involved in colonizing Africa, just seemed to release something manic about their conduct in Cameroon, in Namibia, and in Deutsch-West Africa.
Thank you. We'll now hear an extract from the book.
Okay.
Zu der Zeit machten ihnen vor allem die Gerüchte über einen bevorstehenden Konflikt mit den Briten Sorgen. von dem es hieß, er werde sich, anders als die kleineren Feldzüge gegen die Araber, die Swahili, die Hehe, die Nyamwezi, die Meru und alle anderen, zu einem großen Krieg ausweiten. Die Feldzüge waren schon schlimm genug gewesen, aber nun drohte ein großer Krieg. Angeblich besaßen die Deutschen Kampfschiffe so hoch wie Berge, dazu Boote, die unter Wasser fahren konnten und Kanonen, die eine Stadt noch aus vielen Kilometern Entfernung trafen. Es wurde sogar von einer fliegenden Maschine gemunkelt, die aber niemand je gesehen hatte. Die Briten haben keine Chance, sagte Ilyas, und ein zustimmendes Raunen ging durch die Gruppe. Die Deutschen sind klug und geschickt. Sie wissen, wie man plant und wie man kämpft. Sie denken an alles. Und obendrein sind sie viel netter als die Briten. Seine Zuhörer johlten und lachten. Also ich weiß nicht, sagte einer der Experten aus dem Café, ein Mann namens Mangungu. In meinen Augen werden sie die Briten durch Disziplin schlagen und mit Hilfe der grausamen Nubi und Nyamwezi. Niemand ist so diszipliniert wie die Deutschen. Du weißt nicht, wovon du sprichst, sagte Ilyas. Zu mir waren sie immer sehr nett. Dass ein deutscher Mann einmal nett zu dir war, ändert nichts an dem, was im Laufe der letzten Jahre hier geschehen ist, sagte ein anderer namens Mamudu. In den fast 30 Jahren, die sie das Land nun besetzen, haben die Deutschen so viele Menschen getötet, dass die Erde von Schädeln und Knochen bedeckt und von Blut durchdrängt ist. Ich übertreibe nicht. Doch, tust du, sagte Ilyas. Ihr habt ja keine Ahnung, was im Süden passiert ist, fuhr Mamudu fort. Nein, die Briten haben keine Chance, nicht wenn an Land gekämpft wird. Und das hat wenig mit deutscher Nettigkeit zu tun. Ich stimme dir zu. Die Askari sind grausam und vollkommen verwildert. Gott allein weiß, warum sie so geworden sind, sagte ein Mann namens Mahfudu. Wegen der Offiziere. Sie lernen die Grausamkeit von den Offizieren, sagte Mangungu im Brustton der Überzeugung, denn er liebte es, einen Streit zu schlichten. Sie haben gegen einen Feind gekämpft, der ebenso grausam zurückgeschlagen hat, sagte Ilyas unbeeindruckt. Du weißt noch nicht einmal die Hälfte von dem, was diese Leute den Deutschen angetan haben. Sie mussten unbedingt Rache üben, denn nur so lernen die Wilden Ordnung und Gehorsam. Die Deutschen sind ehrenhafte und zivilisierte Menschen und haben seit ihrer Ankunft viel Gutes getan. Angesichts von so viel Bestimmtheit konnten die anderen nur schweigen. Lieber Freund, sie haben dich wohl gefressen, sagte Mangungu schließlich, um wie immer das letzte Wort zu haben. Doch trotz dieser Gespräche war Khalifa sehr überrascht, als Ilyas ankündigte, sich freiwillig bei der Schutztruppe melden zu wollen. Bist du verrückt geworden? Was hat das alles mit dir zu tun? Fragte er. Hier geht es um einen Konflikt zwischen zwei brutalen Besatzungsmächten, eine hier bei uns und die andere oben im Norden. Sie streiten darum, wer sich uns einverleiben darf. Was hat das mit dir zu tun? Du willst dich einer Söldnertruppe anschließen, die für ihre Grausamkeit und Brutalität bekannt ist? Hast du denn nicht gehört, was die anderen erzählt haben? Du könntest schwer verwundet werden. Oder Schlimmeres. Kannst du noch klar denken, mein Freund? Aber Ilyas ließ sich nicht beirren und rechtfertigen wollte er sich auch nicht. Seine einzige Sorge, sagte er, gelte seiner kleinen Schwester.
Vielen Dank. So in the extract that we just heard, we've met Elias, a young man who as a child was stolen from his parents by German colonial troops. And after years away, he returns to his village to find his parents gone and his sister, Afia, has been given away. I'd like to ask, what was the inspiration behind the character Elias?
Show me that book. I didn't know at the time. This is a book about a man who's a Schutztrooper. You can see him dressed in the Schutztrooper uniform there.
Treu bis in den Tod.
So he's a real person. But I didn't know that. What I mean is I didn't know about him. Not I didn't know that he was a real person. I didn't know about him. I was, though, interested to understand, but why people would have chosen to become mercenaries for a colonial army. Because it's so ironical that you would have thought that people would choose to become oppressors of their own people, and would indeed choose to do so in such a violent way. The Schutztruppe were notorious, they were famously notorious for being so cruel. That it was partly, I suppose, a way of creating that kind of fear that an invading or a colonial army might wish for. So I was asking myself the question, wanting to understand why would people do this? Why would they have done this? Part of the reason also is because I knew people, some of them in my own family, who, not in the First War, not for the Germans, but certainly for the British. My uncle, my mother's brother, joined up, volunteered, nobody forced him. Why would people do that? It was part of the way of trying to answer the question. Writing Afterlives was part of the attempt to understand that. In the process of researching this, I read about, so at this point I didn't have an Ilyas.
Right.
I had a Hamza, and I had the idea of, the very first idea I had was that there would be these two people, a man and a woman, and both are somehow injured in a wider sense than simply, say, a break or something like that. So Hamza's injury is that he's a soldier who has survived. He's a mercenary who has survived the war, but with an injury. And I wanted also a story of a girl or a woman who also is injured in a different way, which because of the deprivations of the condition of being an orphan girl who grows up in that period. So I had those two. But in the process of this research, I read about him. I read about somebody who was an actor, and who was also, before he was an actor, he was a Schutztruppe. And at the end of the war, he went to Germany, and he worked there or became a soldier again, in a way, because a lot of the parts that he played in films was as a Schutztruppe, or if not film, then in those folk village sort of situations. His ending was rather gruesome because he actually ended up in Sachsenhausen, and died there in the concentration camp. So I read a little bit more about him, and I thought, yeah, he's in a way part of the answer to the question that I've been asking about who would do this and why would they do it? Because indeed, he loved Germany, and he loved Germans, and he sang German songs with pleasure. And the pictures that I saw was him taking part in Nazi concerts and singing German songs and so on. So that was part of the answer in a way. So that's why I show him to you, because it's not a question of kind of making fun of him or mocking him, because there are many hundreds of others like him. But in just kind of coming to grips with this, why did people do that? So many, thousands of people who volunteered and who were rather proud of them. I mentioned my uncle. The photograph of him in his uniform, KR uniform, was sitting there, even as a child. He was sitting there on a stand in our house. He was proud of it. There was no shame. There was no like, oh, I don't know why I did that. No, look at me.
The character Elias reminded me very much of somebody I once had a conversation with who had been a child in Ghana when the country became independent, or I say gained re-independence. And this person had said to me, yeah, when the British were there, it was better. And I was horrified, right? I was like, what? And I wanted to ask you how it is to write stories where the characters, like, do you feel any responsibility when you're writing these plots where characters have, I would say, unpopular opinions, I'll call it, especially in the context of the history of European colonialism in Africa?
I feel responsible.
So, for example, when I'm writing...
She asks difficult questions.
Well, when I'm writing, I do have in the back of my head, you know, like, let's say the Black German community, and then if I'm writing a story where a character says, oh, I really love fighting against Africans with the Germans, even though I'm Tanzanian, I would feel a bit of pressure about writing that story. Pressure. I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. And I'm just wondering if you have that feeling as well, and how you deal with it if you do.
I might have had that feeling when I was starting out, maybe. But I think part of what I understood, so I'm not speaking for anybody else, but what I understood is that you've got to trust your instinct, as it were, your intuition about what needs to be said. Of course, not to do it kind of willfully to cause pain, but if it's going to be painful, then it's going to be painful.
So that sounds to me like you need to have a bit of courage.
Well, I would say you need not to be afraid.
What's the difference?
Well, courage is already kind of like that. I have courage. Whereas I think, well, if you want to call it courage, but I think, you have to be not afraid of certain things that somehow you know this might cause disapproval or might not be liked by, you know, somebody in authority or something like that. Talking of it was better under the British. In 19...
Like, that wasn't my phrasing, right?
You know this phrase, mud sticks? No, but talking about that, in about 1966 or so, or maybe 67, the Tanzanian government, we were already Tanzania then, the Tanzanian government introduced national service. The national service was at this point, Tanzania had decided to become a socialist state. And this was kind of like, like they're called, is it Young Pioneers? Yeah? To use that kind of model of sending people out into rural areas and this kind of thing to build latrines and whatever. And so all university students were required to do at least 1 year during their university period in this thing. This was the rule. And university students came out in protest, start marching around Dar es Salaam with placards saying, you know, dictatorship or something. And one of the placards said it was better under the British. And the President Nyerere, of great fame as the benign whatever, shut down the university, expelled all the students. All of them had to reapply to be allowed back in. And those who reapplied had to agree to do a 1-year young pioneer course in the countryside.
Where am I going to go next? Many writers of African descent are, of course, in touch with each other and support each other. And the younger generations look up to and draw inspiration from the older generations. And the last time you were at this festival, it was 2022, and you spoke with Maza Mengist. I reached out to her and asked her for a little message for you. And she said, okay. Abdul Razak is a lovely person. I agree. And one of the things, thank you, yes. And one of the things I find most inspiring in his work is his ability to speak the sharpest truth in a deceptively gentle voice and with wit. The pace of his books, their deliberate attention to the smallest details of ordinary people, is another aspect of his writing that I admire. We are living in a world where ordinary, humble people are bearing the brunt of some of the most devastating, politically motivated decisions of our time, and this makes his work even more urgent. That was her message for you. Do you have any advice for the next generation of writers?
The only advice I have for writers really is, well, there are two, maybe they're kind of connected. That is, write, just write. There is no other way of learning, as it were, of becoming a writer except by writing and keeping at it and working hard at it. So really, that's really the only advice I know. I know these days people can go to school and do courses and that kind of thing. I don't know whether that would make a writer. Maybe it does, I don't know. I do think that what does make a writer in the long run is just keeping writing. So that's really the only advice I know.
Thank you. So the third extract we're going to hear is from Desertion, which is your 7th novel that was published in 2005. Before we hear that extract, I wanted to ask you, how did you choose the title for the story? And is that process typical of how you choose titles for your work?
No, it isn't. Very often, it's not exactly accidental, but kind of whimsical, in the sense that when I start to write, I don't know exactly where the novel is going. I have an idea I'm starting with, but I don't know enough about what's going to happen to have a title. And so I have to name a file, otherwise I'll never find it again. And so I'd give it a name. And often it just sticks. And so, it just stays there. Sometimes, now and then, the publisher might say, I don't like it. In each case, we have to think again. I think that did happen with Desertion, actually. So, but I think again, on the whole, rather than wait to be told, on the whole. So Desertion came to me after the first title I'd come up with didn't appeal.
Okay.
So I said, all right, let me have another think. And then I came up with Desertion.
Did you know that in German the title is Die Abtrünnigen, which translates roughly as the renegades, apostates, rogues? What do you think of that?
Well, I know this happens in other translations as well. Fortunately, I don't read German or Italian or Hungarian or any of those things. So I don't always know what they've done with the title until somebody tells me.
Sorry.
So I think Admiring Silence in German was translated as The Distant Shore or something like that.
Ferne Gestade.
And I think, well, all right.
Okay. So in this section, we're going to hear, we're listening to a conversation between the brother Amin and his sister Farida. They're talking about a woman. I think I've made a mistake. The brother Amin and his sister Farida. Anyway, they're talking about a woman who Amin has developed a romantic interest in.
Okay.
Was sie Amin von Jamila erzählte, war dies.
Ja.
Du kennst doch dieses große Haus in Kiponda, sagte sie. Zuerst gehst du die Straße entlang, wo rechts der alte Friedhof mit dem großen Affenbrotbaum ist. Dann links der Fahrradmechaniker und danach, gleich gegenüber der großen indischen Schule, kommt eine Abzweigung nach links, als wollte man zum Hammam gehen. Du kennst doch den Weg. Und das große Haus, gleich nach der Abzweigung, da wohnt sie. Es ist ihr Haus, das Haus der Familie, dieses große Haus. Sie wohnt im Erdgeschoss und die übrige Familie, ihre Mutter, ihr Vater und ihre 2 älteren Brüder mit ihren Familien wohnen oben. Sie wohnt unten, ganz allein. Ich könnte das nicht in einem so großen Haus. Hast du es gesehen? Kennst du das alte Haus, das ich meine? Es muss finster drin sein, wie in einem Grab oder einer Höhle. Wie in Bi Azizas Haus. Obwohl Jamilas Haus keine Spukruine ist, wie das Haus von unserem Nachbarn. Kannst du dir das vorstellen, als Frau allein da unten zu wohnen? Das kann ja nicht gut gehen. Ich hätte viel zu viel Angst vor dem Shaitani und vor dem Gerede. Als Jamila heiratete, hat die Familie aus diesen Räumen im Erdgeschoss eine Wohnung für sie und ihren Mann gemacht. Es müssen einmal Lagerräume gewesen sein oder Läden mit einem separaten Eingang. Die Leute reden über sie, weißt du? Es wird viel über sie geredet. Was wird geredet? Fragte Amin und sie tat ihm leid. Naja, sie bestand darauf, diese Wohnung mit dem eigenen Eingang zu haben und die Leute sagen, dass sie reserviert und arrogant ist oder Schlimmeres. Warum konnte sie denn auch nicht leben wie alle anderen? Warum musste sie unbedingt allein sein? Was hatte sie denn zu verbergen? Und dieses musste an der Wohnung verändert werden und jenes und diese Wand musste eingerissen werden und jenes Fenster erneuert. Ihr Mann war reich. Sie hatte ihn auf einer ihrer Reisen kennengelernt, in Nairobi oder Dar es Salaam oder sonst wo. Vielleicht hat er für die Renovierung bezahlt, damit sie allein wohnen konnten. Er war irgendein Geschäftsmann. Was er genau gemacht hat, weiß ich nicht. Geschäfte eben. Nach 1 oder 2 Jahren hat er sie verlassen, sich von ihr scheiden lassen und ist dorthin zurückgegangen, wo er hergekommen ist, wo auch immer das war. Das überrascht dich, nicht wahr? Warum überrascht es dich? Sie sieht aus, als hätte sie Erfahrung. Sie sieht so weltgewandt aus. Und dann geht sie hin und heiratet irgend so einen Angeber, beendete Farida den Satz für ihn und nickte. Vielleicht ist sie nicht so erfahren, wie sie aussieht. Er hat eine Weile mit ihr gespielt und dann hat er sie fallen lassen, wie diese dreckigen alten Männer, die sich jedes Jahr eine neue Frau nehmen und sich ein paar Monate später wieder scheiden lassen. Es ist wohl wirklich erstaunlich, dass Jamila in diese Falle gegangen ist. Ihre Familie hatte sein Geld gar nicht nötig. Und daher verstehe ich nicht, warum sie sich überhaupt auf diesen Mann eingelassen hat. Vielleicht hat sie ihn geliebt, sagte Amin. Es sollte sarkastisch klingen, aber Farida sah ihn mit einem verklärten Lächeln an, als hätte er etwas furchtbar Romantisches gesagt. Jedenfalls haben alle erwartet, dass Jamila wieder hinaufziehen würde zu ihrer Familie, nachdem ihr Mann gegangen war. Und irgendjemand fragte sogar an, ob die Wohnung zu mieten sei. Aber sie weigerte sich auszuziehen. Da fingen die Leute dann zu reden an und behaupteten, sie müsse irgendwas im Schilde führen, wenn sie so allein da unten lebte, mit eigener Eingangstür. Und dann begann sie zu reisen. Es heißt, es war geschäftlich, aber ich kann es nicht recht glauben. Und ich weiß schon gar nicht, was für Geschäfte das sein sollen. Ich weiß, dass sie Verwandte in Mombasa hat und auch weiter oben an der Küste. Es überrascht mich, dass du nichts über sie weißt. Die Leute reden ziemlich viel über sie. Die Leute, die sagen über jeden so schlimme Dinge, dass ich manchmal gar nicht hinhöre, antwortete Amin. Also hast du doch etwas gehört, erwiderte Farida mit einem triumphierenden Grinsen. Na los, was hast du gehört? Amin zögerte. Ich habe sie vorbeigehen sehen und dann gehört, wer sie ist, wie sie heißt. Aber ich kann mich nicht erinnern, etwas Schlechtes über sie gehört zu haben. Nur, dass ihre Großmutter mit einem Europäer zusammen war, dass sie seine Geliebte war, sagte er. Farida nickte bedeutungsschwer. Das stimmt. In Mombasa. Ich glaube nicht, dass sie noch lebt. Das ist kaum möglich. Aber auch als sie noch lebte, hat niemand sie besucht. Und sie ist nirgends hingegangen. Wir sind einmal an ihrem alten Haus vorbeigegangen. Jamilas Mutter, Bi Asma, ist das Kind der beiden. Schau dir nur ihre Haut an. Wie Milch, so cremefarben, obwohl sie schon so alt ist. Sie ist hierher gezogen, um zu heiraten und wahrscheinlich auch, um dem Gerede der Leute in Mombasa zu entfliehen. Ich glaube, sie ist von Verwandten aufgezogen worden, aber Sicher hat niemand ihr gegenüber über das skandalöse Leben ihrer Mutter ein Blatt vor den Mund genommen. Böse Zungen können einen Menschen zugrunde richten. Wie auch immer, was ihre Großmutter getan hat, hat nichts mit Jamila zu tun, sagte Armin. Es ist nichts als sinnloser, boshafter Klatsch. Ich verstehe nicht, warum die Menschen so etwas tun. Etwas mehr Freundlichkeit und Verständnis würde ihnen nicht schaden. Wann kommt sie wieder? Was wollte sie noch über mich wissen?
Danke. So I'd like to ask 2 or 3 more questions. I hope that we can take this time. In this section that we just heard, we've seen how gossip destroys a reputation, particularly that of a young woman. And people's talk can cut you to shreds, was the quote that really stuck out for me. Your specific focus on female characters and gender-based discrimination is part of what makes your work so captivating for me. Could I ask you to tell us a bit more about how you research for those characters and what motivates you to tell their stories?
I know a lot of women.
Fascinating.
And they have been part of my life from just about before I was born. So it's no great effort to write about a woman, or to imagine anyway. Well, I know there's a way of thinking, particularly about that. You can't write about women because you can't understand, you can't feel, you can't be like that. Well, I don't try to do that. In other words, you can write about people without making a pretense that you kind of deeply understand and can analyze and whatever. I don't even do that with men, on the whole. So it's not impossible to imagine how a person feels. Women are persons too, without some women anyway, without necessarily wanting to be authoritative about, this is the condition of being a woman or something like that. So not only do I know something about women because I have eyes to see and ears to hear and watch and whatever, but I have 4 sisters who I grew up with. I have had a mother and an aunt. I have a wife. I have daughters. What's the problem?
You know women. Thank you. So a novelist friend of mine says that my next question is a little bit like asking which of your children you love the most. So forgive me, but I'd really like to know, of all your novels, do you have a favorite?
No, I won't forgive you. It's not really an easy question, as your friend told you. And it's not because of a kind of loyalty to one book or another. All of them, of course, a writer, you give everything you can at the time of writing to make it as work as well as possible. Sometimes it's the nearest, as it were, that is because it's just fresh in your mind. Sometimes it's something. I was listening to you, Frank, reading Desertion there, and I was thinking, it's not bad. That's okay, I did all right there. Something like that. So sometimes it's the pleasure of revisiting accidentally. I haven't read Desertion for, I should think, since 2007 or something like that, after the touring around and reading is over. But there is one book that I suppose feels important to me, and that's Paradise. And I think it's because I connect it with going back after a long absence when I thought I would never be able to go back. Mm. But also it seems to me that I was happy with the where I attempted to evoke a time and a way of being. And I thought perhaps it worked.
Thank you. My last question would be, what's next for Abdulrazak Gurnah?
Going back to my house in England and resting for a while before the next launch somewhere.
Yeah.
No, the next thing is to get on with as best one can with life, but also to find time to write.
Great. We're looking forward to your next works, of course. No pressure, but yeah. I'm sure you'll be invited back to Berlin when that comes out.
Well, I suspect, I hope. Where are they? Where's my team? Well, I think there's still, oh, there they are, okay. There are other books to come. I mean, the Penguin, Random House, Verlag have already brought out 6. Is that right? Is it 6? Okay. But I think there are more to come. So I'll be back. Even if I don't get around to finishing this new one for another
We're patient.
5 years?
Yeah, we're patient. I would like to end by, if I may, giving you a gift. I heard you in a conversation with Nana Ofori-Atta Ayim, talking about black Germans, black people in Germany, the history of black people in Germany, and it seemed to me that you did not yet know about this book, which is, many people know this, Farbe bekennen in German. It was published in 1985 and was kind of like the major event in black Germany around bringing people together to tell their own stories, to come together as a community. And this year is the 40th year of the foundation of the initiative Black People in Germany, and ADEFRA, which is the Black Queer Feminist Organization. So this is the book, and it's showing our colors, but this is my only copy, and it's the original. I bought it in 1995, and I'm going to keep this. This isn't the present.
See, she tells us all that, and then she says, oh, I'm not going to give it to you.
But you're allowed to touch it. But this is the gift I wanted to give you. This is based on the research of a dear friend of mine, Tiffany Florville. And she's obviously researched it from this book. She's come to Germany. She's had given lots of interviews, done lots of archival work, and researched that time of Germany when these organizations began mobilizing Black Germany. This is the book that I wanted to give you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I could lend you this, but...
It's too late. The damage is done now.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk and for your beautiful work. It's appreciated. And yeah, we look forward to welcoming you back to Berlin with your next.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
I've got to say something. So, for everybody who would like to have a book signed by Professor Abdulrazak Gurnah, I've been told to tell you that you've got to go to the Oberes foyer, and the request is, because there'll be so many people who would like to have their book signed, that we have to find a way to manage. We'll be doing no selfies, and only one book per person, please, to be signed, and it will just be a signature, no pictures or stories or such. Okay, have a good evening. Thank you.